David France is a past Oscar nominee for How to Survive a Plague, and his latest is Welcome to Chechnya, currently available through HBO, which shows the anti-gay purge that's been occurring in the region of Russia since the late 2010s. Since the film premiered, has there been any progress in the LGBT Chechen community fighting against this crackdown?
Well, there certainly has been. I mean, the reason that I was invited to work on this project with the activists who are doing this work on the ground in Russia was because they needed a tool that they could use to carry out to the larger world and force conversations with diplomats and NGOs and other leaders about bringing the kind of pressure that's going to be necessary against the Chechen leadership and the Russian leadership to stop the atrocities, the genocide that's unfolding there. And unfortunately, in the first 3 years of this genocide that began in 2017, the international outcry was so muted that that there was really like no slowing of the crimes, and it was left then to these kind of ordinary Russian queer activists who pulled together to create out of whole cloth this network of safe houses and this whole system for rescuing people from this human hunt and getting them to safety. And so they have been able to use the film, and I've been really pleased to have been able to help create this piece of evidence for them that allowed them to do screenings, for example, in Washington this past summer, that brought sanctions for the first time from the US government against the Chechen leadership for these crimes. Sanctions also emanating from the UK and the EU and Canada and elsewhere. So for the first time, really making this an international issue. In 2020, even though it's been going on unabated since 2017. So I guess in this way, this is what a documentary film can really do to amplify the voices of people who are fighting for social justice in parts of the world that are being ignored by the mainstream media, that are being shouted down or squeezed out of the kind of international political conversation by other events, for example, like the lunacy in Washington and the COVID pandemic, and yet we have been able to see some good progress there.
How were you able to connect with people who were living their lives in secret?
Well, they had already, by the time I reached them, they had already found this network of people who had built this it's an underground railroad of a kind that we haven't seen or read about since maybe since Hitler, where in like nondescript houses throughout Russia, people are hiding deep inside these homes behind curtained windows, moving from safe house to safe house, inching their way away from Chechnya and out of Russia. So I was able to talk to the people who had built that system and I was invited in early on to not to bring in a camera crew or anything that might, I couldn't show up with a van and sound engineers and booms and the like. But we did sneak into the first of the safe houses, and we left a camera there that we could come back and use in the future. And we began a conversation with the people who had survived these unspeakable horrors and about how we might be able to tell their stories and whether or not they were motivated to tell the world about what had happened to them. And many of them were, but their concern was how endangered they were. What's going on in Chechnya is it's been described by the political leadership there as a blood cleansing. It's a government-sanctioned, government-directed campaign to identify all LGBTQ Chechens, round them up, torture them to get information from them about others that they might know, and then to liquidate them. It's an atrocity that's hard to fit in your head that they're carrying this out. And what everybody knew in the shelter system that I met was that they would be hunted for the rest of their lives as part of this effort in this ethnic minority to cleanse the minority of LGBTQ Chechens. So we had to work on this idea of how to maintain anonymity and how to move forward in a way that we were describing amongst ourselves anyway, me and my team, as being not just consent, but informed consent. Like it was easy for me to get, especially some of the younger people, to say, to give me their trust. But I wanted them to give me their trust in a knowing way. So that began a conversation about how to film them, how we were safeguarding the footage, how we were moving the footage through the country and out of the country, how we were managing that footage and all of our digital media, even once we got back to the United States, in ways that would make it impenetrable and reliably safe. And then ultimately what we would do to try and mask their identities in post-production in the film. And on all of those steps, I worked with the people that I met who had entrusted their stories in us to make sure that they signed off on each of those steps, and that they had agency, and that they had control, and that they had, more importantly, comfort about knowing that what they revealed to me was going to do only good or potentially good and bring no harm to them.
Did you have any subjects who participated, who had initially participated with the documentary, but then backed out due to fear of exposure and possible physical harm?
We had only one subject who changed her mind, but it wasn't that she changed her mind about being in the film. I asked people whether or not they needed to be disguised, and she felt she did not need to be disguised. So it wasn't until after we were nearly finished with the film and about ready to premiere it that she called and she said that she felt her circumstances had changed, and she felt that that her risk level had skyrocketed and she could no longer appear in the film. And that caused us to scramble, because certainly we had all of her sign-offs at every step of the way. We could have gone forward, but because of this kind of ethical standard that we were hoping to, to continue carrying throughout the process of rolling the film out, we had to potentially hold the film back from premiere at Sundance in order to be able to disguise her character in the film at the last minute. And luckily we were able to do it. And it was we were able to do it in a way that was part of the seamless language of our facial disguise language that we used in the film. And she was able to feel some great relief that her life had remained as safe as she needed it to remain at that time.
Before you were making documentaries, you had quite a career as an investigative journalist. And I was curious as to whether there were any skills from working as a journalist that aided you in making this documentary.
That's such a good question. I think so. And I'm a particular kind of long-form investigative reporter. I'm an embedder. I have embedded with military units. I have embedded with families going through crisis. I have spent my career spending a lot of time with people and practicing a kind of a practiced empathy of this commitment that I bring to my work about listening to people, hearing them, and then trying to convey their stories without intervening in them. And so I try to work in ways that recognizes my conscious presence in the process of reporting, and then works to remove my presence from the presentation on the screen. And although I do, clumsily appear in multiple frames of the film, Welcome to Chechnya, I wanted to produce a film that was about a Russian experience in the voice and presentation of the Russian subjects themselves, and not an American overlay on that in any way. So that was my exercise that I brought from, I think, my investigative background into the shelter system and into this remarkable network of people, not only building the shelters, as you see in the film, but actually going out and hand rescuing people and extracting them from extreme perilous dangers. And I wanted to see that world the way they saw it, and then bring you, the audience, into their interpretation of their world, and the stories that they want you to hear.
Well, David, thank you so much for joining us. We wish you all the best during this award season, and thanks for joining us on our panel today.